I am your host, Dr. Catherine Clinton, and I am just thrilled and honored to be speaking with Veda Austin today. Veda Austin is a world-renowned water researcher, and I came across her work this past year, and she is just absolutely incredible what she is doing with consciousness and water. And I am so excited to just piece apart everything that she's doing and really get to the bottom of it. So thank you so much, Veda, for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure, and I'm just so delighted to be here and talk about my absolute favorite topic.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're kindred spirits in that way. So I really, really appreciate your work. Can you tell us a little bit more what you're doing? I know that you're an expert in crystallography.
Crystallography, that's the one.
Crystallography, yes. Tell us a little bit more about your research and what you're finding.
Sure. So, in really simplified terms, what I do is I take liquid water and I freeze it using a method of short-term freezing. So I freeze it for a short time, and then there is a stage where there is liquid water on the top and ice on the bottom. And what I do is I tip the liquid water away, which reveals this incredibly beautiful ice crystallography. And so what I am seeing in this crystallography are literal images and pictures that have a great deal of relevance to their influence. For example, the very, very first image that I ever saw doing this work, all the way 9 years ago now, was when I saw I had a petri dish of water in my hand, and I had read some of Masaru Emoto's books and seen his work. I'd also seen a man by the name of Laurent Costa's work. Now, he's not so well known as Emoto, but his work was incredibly valuable to me because he was also looking at work microscopically like Emoto, but he really didn't want to experiment on the water because to him water was his spiritual teacher. And so he really wanted to just invite water to share whatever it wanted with him. And so sometimes he would like smile at the water before he took a drop of it and flash froze it and photographed it. And what he was seeing in his microscopic photos were faces smiling back at him. He was getting fish, he was getting hearts, and all these things that he was seeing as images, as like pictures, were relevant to him in some way from that day. And so he also got geometries like Emoto, but his work was so impactful because what he was seeing was like images rather than geometries. And so when I see a happy face, I'm like, it kind of makes me smile. And I'm like, oh my God, look at that little happy face. And so I worked professionally as an artist, as an oil painter for quite some years in my earlier life. And so I do see the world through an artistic lens. And then the third person who was a pioneer and very much helped to influence my decision to just launch into seeing if water really did have some kind of way of storing information was a man by the name of Thomas Hieronymus, who was a radionic engineer. And he actually made an interesting discovery when he went into a Parisian meat market. He noticed that the freshly placed organs of an animal appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind where they were placed. So, like the frost would freeze into the shape of a liver organ directly above an actual liver organ. And so his hypothesis was that there seemed to be some kind of life force energy still emanating out of the organ, that even though the organ was no longer attached or inside a living animal, and he put that down to there being water in the blood, and that water held this kind of blueprint of that organ, and it was sharing information still with the water in the air, and as that water in the air froze, it formed into this blueprint of the liver organ. And so his work was very encouraging for me and very interesting, but mostly because it was macroscopic. He was seeing this phenomena with his naked eye. And all those years ago, I didn't have a microscope, so I'm like, well, I have a petri dish from some other things I was doing, and I have some fabulous spring water that helped to heal me from a car accident I was in. And I thought, well, I'm just going to like pour some water into this petri dish, and I'm going to project a thought of some kind, and then I'm going to stick it in my freezer, because the magic for all of those people was in the freezing. It's where the invisible became visible. And so that was my very rudimentary idea right back in the day. And so what I did was holding the petri dish of water, thinking about what I'm going to think about, and I saw this bit of fluff floating around in there. So I put my hand in to take out the fluff. And I consciously thought, oh, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's memory. And so I thought, well, that'll do. And I put it into the freezer with the peas and the broccoli and the ice cream and all the stuff in there. And I kind of forgot about it. And then a few hours later, I came back and I'm like, oh, yeah, let's have a look. So I pulled it out and I held it up to the light and I took a photo on my iPhone. And that photo that I saw has launched 36,000 photos of water responding in an incredibly intelligent manner. What I saw, and I will show you because I think a picture speaks 1,000 words, what I saw was a literal hand, and well, not literal hand, but it looked like a literal hand in the ice. It took up half of the petri dish, so macroscopically huge, and it looked like an X-ray. And when I saw it, I have to admit, I kind of freaked out because it was so clear. And I'm like, I wasn't expecting to see anything really. And so I was thinking, oh, I wonder if it's just my imagination seeing this. And so I showed my son the photo. And children, you know, they're very good at telling the truth about what they see. And I said, so Rama, you know, what does this look like to you? And he said, looks like a hand, Mum. Like I was an idiot, like of course. And he said, it's kind of a creepy hand. And I'm like, yeah, it kind of is, but it's still a hand. And so the next step was to go down to the ocean. And I thought, well, if any water is naturally going to be informed, surely it would be seawater. So I collected some seawater and froze a thin layer of it. And I was nervous again, because I thought if I see anything related to the ocean in this water, once it's frozen, that means something huge. Like that was my okay, if I see something again, this is something. Mm-hmm. And so I pulled it out and I took a photo, and I took this incredible photo of this fish. There was the fish shape with a perfectly round eye, with the gills, with the tail, with fins, and I'm like, oh my God. And then my household freezer became my most used household appliance. Really hardly anything except the kettle got used. And so I just started playing with all different kinds of waters and inspiring influences. So I used people's photographs to see if we'd see an image relative to their face, and all kinds of things. I used music, lots of genres of music. I used words, I used thoughts, symbols, various different media. Like I would literally put my petri dish of water and sit it on the couch and let it watch a show and see if it would actually do anything, because the beautiful thing is I had no limitations as to what I could do or play with. And I would even speak to water and ask questions. Now, over the course of that year, this was really when I started to get familiar with Jerry Pollack's work and start to really, really dive deep into the new science of water, because as you know, there really is one. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to see what was happening in the freezer. But we don't, unfortunately, have see-through freezers, which I'm putting it out there to the universe that someone makes a see-through freezer for me. That would be amazing. And for anyone else doing this work. But, you know, so I just started opening the freezer earlier and earlier and clear to see what was going on there. And because Jerry Pollack, he talks about the fourth phase of water happening in the process of water freezing, but before it's frozen, and in the process of water melting, but before it's melted. Not just as the exclusion zone water in the cells, but actually we're able to identify it in kind of glacial water, for example, in glacial melt. And so I'm like, oh, I wonder if this magic that I'm seeing is actually happening in that stage. And so as I was opening the freezer, I got to a point where around about 5 minutes I'd open it up and I observed something really unique and interesting. I'm like, oh, it looks like there's something under the water. It looks like there's some ice in there. Well, let's see what happens if I just wanted to see it closer. So I literally pulled it out and the liquid water tipped away and I saw this imagery and it was so much clearer, so three-dimensional. And it was like, oh my goodness, like this is what I've been, needing to find, because I look back now, 9 years later, at that hand image and that fish image and some of the other images, which were literally frozen solid. And I'm amazed that I got as clear imagery as I did back then compared to the way I do the work now. It is just like a quantum leap of information, because I'm freezing water and photographing water in the first freeze. The water freezes in layers. And it's interesting because it will create the bottom layer of information, which is the most relevant to the information that it absorbed prior to freezing. And then there's a secondary layer, which also has secondary information, but there are these like the scaffolding in between that kind of hold the second up. So there's this liquid water in between. And as you freeze water for like 15 minutes, sometimes you'll see that there's these big water bubbles that float around in it. Well, that's the least informed water. And so when you crack it, you'll see them tip out, but that's where you can actually see or how it looks, what those layers look like. And when I teach people how to do this, I always overfreeze one so we can see what I'm talking about. So it's so fascinating, because when I started using that technique, that's where the imagery just took off and the pictures just kind of went to another level of detail.
I love that. And I love the story about the hand and the fish and the preciseness of those images, even though your technique wasn't precise. It was almost as if the water was beckoning you to do more.
That's exactly what it's been doing. And a big part of this work is that, of course, it's been my own self-discovery in many ways, because water is also a mirror. So I have to remember that so much of what I'm seeing in the ice is a reflection of what I'm seeing within myself. And the way in which we even see the world is so internal. We take these pictures that we see outside and translate them through our eyes. And we take all sound in through our ears and taste through our mouth and touch inside our body. It's like, what do we experience even that's outside of us? And that leads into a bigger conversation about water as the observer, because we can observe ourselves. And I would love to get into that at some point in this conversation, whenever you want. And you just let me know whether you'd like to share some pictures. Maybe since we've just talked about the hand and the fish, it might be a good time.
I think that would be beautiful. It's so nice to have the images. They really teach
Yeah.
us.
Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen so we can have a look at my very first ice photo. Can you see this okay?
Oh, absolutely.
So you can see it is a kind of creepy hand. but but it's definitely a hand. And the interesting thing is that on either side you can see that there are two fingers that bend slightly, and actually I inherited my mother's slightly crooked fingers. So it isn't actually just any hand, it is very relevant to my hand, which is really, really interesting. And here is the picture of the fish. Now you can see it has a different texture, and that is because seawater freezes differently than fresh water. So you can see the outline of the fish here, his tail, his eye, his fins, and his gill. Now I'm going to just come back in this presentation here because people have most people have never even heard of Laurent Costa. But to me, his work is just so important. And you can see that he has this beautiful heart. He wrote a book called Into the Heart, Journey into the Heart of Water. And, and that's the cover picture. And you can see all these little happy faces, and these are microscopic. They're really quite remarkable. So as we kind of go through, I wanted to show you the difference between my old technique and my new technique. There is so much more clarity, there's more light, there's more depth, it's very three-dimensional. And I'll also say that my son did this entire one himself. His name is Rama, and in the Hindu texts, Lord Rama always has a bow and arrow. And so we were talking about that and about his name, and he thought he would project a thought of an arrow into the water before freezing it. And this is the image that he took using my technique, and he even took this photo himself, which is one of the clearest. I think I need to really get him on my team doing all my photos because it shows me up. And so, but when you compare it to the original, where the water was frozen solid, there is a very, very distinct difference. Now, as people want to get more of an understanding of what I'm doing, this is the crystallography that is sort of the first freeze, and the liquid is drained away, and you can see there's liquid on top and ice on the bottom. So it's about really learning what you're looking for, and as I've mentioned, I teach people how to do this in workshops. And actually this is a very important picture. Now it might not look like much, but actually this is a rare and interesting photo. As water begins to freeze, it will often send out these like shooter icicles that that are very important. And what I've captured here is this kind of halo around the spears. Now, this is interesting because I think that water has a kind of internal light source that as it freezes, it pushes outside of itself, and that light actually gives the water the pathway to design. And it's interesting because I interviewed a woman some time ago now, an indigenous lady who said that she could speak to bees. And since I speak to water, nothing surprises me anymore about people that can communicate with all different kinds of life forms. And so she said that she would watch the bees come and go from their hive for long periods of time. And she said eventually a worker bee came out and communicated to her that they didn't mind her watching the hive, but asked that that she didn't look at it for a long period of time because her conscious expression was putting too much light into the hive. And that really interested me because it's very, very relative to this picture and the work that I do, and that your conscious expression is literally giving water more light to design with. And it kind of also makes you think about, well, you know, what are we giving our light to? What are we focusing on in our lives? So this relationship between water and light is incredibly important and powerful, much more than we really might imagine. So as I,
I
sorry.
um, no, I was just going to say, if you could just repeat that, I think that is absolutely profound, and I don't want anyone watching today to miss that. That light is guiding the pathway, the design element. Can you just repeat that
Mm.
for us? Because it was just such a gem.
Sure. Yeah, I think that literally the light is the guiding the water by designing the pathway for the ice to start to design. It is this internal light that water has that it literally uses to design as it begins to freeze. It's a fascinating phenomena of which I want to investigate further. But I think it really is. Literally, the light source lights the way for the water to form as ice and to take the design and the shape.
Absolutely fascinating. Absolutely. I have goosebumps.
Well, that's why I love this picture so much because it was just one of those perfect moments where this was actually taken in the freezer as it was starting to freeze. Now this is a powerful picture. My friend Wendy, I always call her the face of water because she was the first face I ever really captured. And so I used her photo as the inspiring influence, and I put my petri dish of water on top of her photo on the right for 30 seconds, removed it, and then froze it using my new technique. And you can clearly see her face is captured in the ice. Um, so I also was invited to use Sadhguru's photo and do the same thing. And you can see where sometimes I've overfrozen. You know, it's like sometimes different waters freeze at different times. Getting it to be perfect is not always easy. And different freezers have different freezer settings. So there are a lot of those aspects to it. But you can still see that it takes up half of that petri dish, his whole face. Now, I've also done coins as we used this coin, which was a picture, so I used the same technique as the others. And this is a good example here where I used a picture of Jupiter, also known as Zeus, from a picture of the statue, and I've overfrozen it. So this was before I really got my technique down right, but you can still see his face emerging out, and the hair and
Absolutely.
the beard and the eyes and everything. So it's really nice to see that it's taken me a long time to get the technique just right. And even now, I still overfreeze things sometimes, but there's still something significant to be able to gain from seeing my process and my kind of like way of discovering this in a it's very organic, but others can do this too, and that's one of the things that really excites me. So these are just some examples of my work in bulk. So um, for example, what a really interesting part about this particular one over here, you can see I put my thumb in the petri dish of water, um, but you might notice that the image of the thumb, there's a little like nick here in the nail. Well, a few hours after doing this, I literally like I stubbed my nail got like cut, and I got a little kind of my nail broke in just the same area as it had here, but it was 3 hours after doing this test and seeing the ice image. So it's almost like somehow would have knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
These are frozen, excuse me, frozen tears. So I actually was cutting onions and I let some tears fall into a petri dish of water. And so the image that appeared looks very much like my iris. But when you cut an onion in half, you also see kind of a similar design, but more the rings are going around that way. So you have two of them. It's very interesting. These are some more. What I love about these two, well, there's stories behind all of them, which I won't get into all of them because there's lots more to discuss. But this top one, I asked a friend who had found out she was pregnant to basically drink some water and leave me some whilst she was thinking about her baby. And I've circled the baby that appeared in the ice relative to the stage of pregnancy she was at. And for this one, it looks like literally like an etching of a schnauzer dog with a prominent round eye. And I'd gone into a cafe and I saw they have this bowl outside for thirsty dogs, and this schnauzer dog had come and it was like drinking out of the bowl and it left all this water behind. And I'm like, oh God, I'm going to be that person. So I went to the lady and I said, you know, this might be the strangest request you've ever had, but could I please have a takeaway cup so I can scoop up some of that dog bowl water and freeze it? And I'm sure to this day she thinks I'm crazy. But I did go back and show her what happened so she doesn't think I'm so crazy. And I literally just went home and froze some of that water and the dog appeared. For the middle one, it's interesting because my daughter had a book that she got out of the library all about birds, and this was a picture of an owl. And so what I did was I got a piece of cardboard and I put the cardboard halfway down the bird's face, and on top of the cardboard I put my petri dish of water, and it literally designed the other eye. So it wasn't actually quote unquote seeing the image. So I've started to do that, and I will be sharing this at some point, but it's very early days because there's so much to do. But by putting petri dishes of water on top of books and seeing what I get, it's like endless the amount of work that can be done here. Just more examples of water responding to various different influences. This one was when we were, my son and my children, they are very influential in my work. And so the water gets to see all kinds of movies. This was my son's choice. And so literally the petri dish of water was actually just put in front of this Batman movie and then frozen. And you know, they kind of carry on. There are many, many, many of them. This was when I asked water if it knew my name. And so this is literally how I write my initials, and I link my initials together, but water never saw that. This is from asking it a question, which is really remarkable.
Incredible.
This one's very special. This is me and my mum. And my mum passed away in 1999 and I was missing her. And so I said to the water, can you please connect to my mum? And what's significant about this image that you see is that back in the day, I used to live in Japan and work in Japan for a year. And Mum and I would write letters to each other. And at the end of every letter, my mum would always attempt to draw a circle. Her circles were rubbish. And she would put a heart in the middle. And so when I saw this misshapen circle with a heart in the middle, it was like, oh my God, this is so, so significant and so special. And every year now on her birthday, I ask water the same thing and I get the same response. And so I'm going to update this at some point with the other images that I've done since then. And they seem to be getting clearer and clearer and clearer each time I do it. It's very special.
Very special.
I did the same thing here for someone's dad who passed away, and essentially, without getting to the giant story, I simply asked the water, could you connect to my friend's dad? And I left the water overnight. There was a reason for that. There was a whole heap of, there were some other tests I was doing for him, and we needed to leave them out overnight so that people from all around the world could send energy to those 2 dishes I left out, because he's a big water guy and he wanted an image for his birthday, but he didn't know I left this one out as well. But when I came back the next morning, this particular one, the water had evaporated so much there wasn't hardly any water left in the dish, and I couldn't understand it because the other 2 had the same amount of water that they originally had in there when I put them out the day before. And so I just froze what was left, and all of it froze into this heart, which was really, really special. So, I mean, the next thing is I've got up is all about hydroglyphs, but I think we can start discussing more about whatever you like before we get into hydroglyphs, or we can launch like straight in there.
I'm just stuck on the picture of the rubbish circle with the heart in it. It's just I've actually got a little tear in my eye because I think that's what drew me to quantum biology, to the new science of water and this fourth phase and this intelligence and the ether and the light and everything that informs it is clearly to me saying we are all connected, and not necessarily right here on this plane, but in other ways to those that we have lost. And so it's just absolutely gives me tears and chills to hear you speak, because this is exactly what drew me to this science, is that it holds more promise. My husband was like, "Why are you so into this?" several years ago, and it was like, because it means we're all connected. And so I have a selfish drive to sort of keep proving that it's true that we're all connected. And so I'm very grateful for your work, Veda. It's just absolutely mind blowing. And I would love to get into this idea of hydroglyphs.
Hmm. Yeah, well, firstly, just coming to back to touch on what you've just said. I mean, it seems like such a cliche. It's such a blanket statement that we throw around all the time. We're all connected. But actually feeling connected to that statement, people struggle with it because, like,
Mhm.
oh, yeah, but the one thing that really, like, scientifically does connect all of us
Mhm.
on this planet is water. There's
Yeah.
not one living thing on this planet that does not have water within it. Someone once said to me, what if water is using its consciousness to express itself through us and through every living thing on this planet, to observe itself from every perceivable and imperceivable perspective? And there is this Instagram post going around where there's this guy saying, "What if water was God?" That would mean that it would mean that it was inside us and outside of us. It would mean that all these different kinds of things. I'm not saying that water is God, but the idea that water is literally in all these stages, because when we think of water, we tend to think of water only in the fluid stage.
Mhm.
But the fact that water is in the air, one of the things I think personally is that because we have electrical charge,
Mhm.
and that can be measured by heart math,
Mhm.
um, the water in the air, and the fact that we even breathe means that there is water in the air. The
Mhm.
water that is evaporated, that is in the air, is attracted to our electrical charge, which means we actually have this web of kind of um, energy around us that is absorbing information in this gas stage, kind of evaporated water
Mhm.
stage, and is means that we can go into a room and feel what that energy feels like. It means that we can like use that web to feel into what somebody else's web feels like. It's why when you kind of fall in love, that idea, we use this term when you fall in love. It's like, what is it? It was like love at first sight. It's like, what does that mean? It's like, I don't know. It was the thunderbolt. I just saw that person. That was it. Well, actually, it's a big part of why we fall in love like that or have that immediate connection is because everyone's patterning outside of the body of the water that's attracted to that, like, the electrical charge is unique. We have our own kind of patterns. Well, sometimes we actually meet someone whose patterning is so similar to ours that when those patterns join, there is this instant recognition. There is this immediate knowing that this person is somehow connected to you because the webbing connects. And when you're falling in love or uh, rising to love, as some people prefer to say, um, it is about learning how to mirror these patterns, these energetic patterns, which kind of almost ties in with that idea of the twin flame, not the flame, but the twin waters. And
Mhm.
it's a very interesting phenomenon that's going on, and that there's so much, I think, that we just haven't been able to prove yet scientifically, but it doesn't take away from the fact that I believe that it's very real. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke said that magic is only science that is yet to be discovered.
Right. Right. And when we look historically, that's how it is. Every new idea is, the science at the time can't prove it. And so it
Mm,
takes decades or a century, and then we have a new microscope or a new technique, and then we can validate those things that we always intuitively knew. But yeah,
mm,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to talk about hydroglyphs because and then I'll show some examples. So when hydroglyphs originated from music for me. So a very important thing that I think it's always worth talking about with Emoto's work, he showed water responding in incredible contrasts to like love and hate. But with
Hmm.
music, he showed classical music versus heavy metal.
Hmm.
And bearing in mind, there's lots of people in the world that actually really don't want to listen to either one of those. And there's heaps of genres of music out there that we all have different resonances to. And because I have never known water to be in judgment, I really do think that water in its most um, spiritual or conscious kind of perspective and is very much the observer, never in judgment. People can be in judgment, but not water in this area. I think there's actually two types of water in people. I think there's the physical waters and the spiritual waters. Um, the spiritual waters are what it gives us the ability to be the observer of ourselves. But I really want to talk about that soon. But bringing it back to music, um, I'm pretty sure whoever did the test with heavy metal probably didn't like it. And so when my teenage son years ago came to me and he said, "Oh, Mum, I don't want to listen to classical music all the time. Does that mean the water's like hating it every time I listen to Tupac?" And I'm like, no, water's not in judgment. So I decided to do lots and lots of different crystallography using all kinds of genres, from drum and bass and R&B and like I don't know, chanting and um, like just all kinds of stuff with various different, some heavy metal and why am I finding it so hard to think of different things? I did some classical music as well and um, yeah, African drumming, like loads of different ones. And what I observed is that water tends to do a number of things. And I also did like the sound of Om. And I did a lot of repeated tests also with water because with music because I wanted to see if it would show similar patterning
Hmm.
with the same song over and over again. So with the sound of Om I discovered, oh, it likes to design images that look like rings of a tree. So, in my arrogance, I assumed that that water, listening to the sound of a gong, might do something similar to the sound of Om. But because I assumed that I knew what it was going to do, which a huge part of my work is about not expecting anything from water. It's
Hmm.
like actually you have to step out of your um, controlling ways in which we it's surprising how much we try to control our world and our life and it's really interesting but to show me and to highlight that water rather than designing anything similar to these kind of patterns that look like a ring of a tree, it designed the actual gong with a mallet on top. So it designed the instrument that was playing the music. And so as we kind of moved on, I did the song Stairway to Heaven. And when I repeated that, 12 times or so, and every single time, not just like random, like here and there, but every single time I would see this sort of ice image that looked like a stairway. And I was like, oh, I wonder if that actually means stairway. So I wrote the word stairway. And I need to say, water doesn't read words, it reads the energy of words. So it doesn't matter if you write stairway in another language, water reads the energy of that word. So lots of people always say, can I understand different languages and stuff? And so that's why I'm sharing about that, as well as symbols. And so I saw this stairway appear after using the word and using my technique. And I'm like, oh, I wonder if it'll do it again. Anyway, long story short, I did it 50 times. And I saw this symbol just appear over and over again. And I'm like, God, I actually think this is something really interesting. And then and it wasn't that I did it one after the other, after the other, after the other. My life is very busy with 3 children and in life and stuff. So I would do it over a period of time when I could, which I think is actually even more amazing, because it's no one can say, oh, well, there was still an imprint still somehow left in the dish from the last test,
Right.
and things like which could even be relevant. So, so then I eventually thought, because 50 was always my number of not being random, and so I thought, well, what do you do with a staircase? Like I was invited to think deeper into meaning. And then if you look at it relative to that song anyway, it's like, well, you climb up it. It's like a stairway to heaven. You would assume it's going upward. So I wrote the words climb up. And I got the stairway. And I did that 50 times. And then I was like, oh, there's layers of meaning here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is different than art. So water can design in many ways, many we probably haven't discovered. But I always say that art is the heart of water, because water loves to design and artistic expression. But with these symbols, the symbols, they always look the same. So they are literally symbols that aren't kind of random or expressionist. Not to say that the art is difficult to comprehend as an image. As a quick side note, Jerry Pollack, some years ago now, after seeing my work, he said, well, why don't you put a study together, a survey, where you have 25 of your photos and you simply write, what does this image look like to you? You don't tell anybody about what they're looking at, and just see if there's real image recognition going on. And so I did that, and I gave the survey out to people that knew me to put out on social media. So no one knew it was coming from me, and no one knew what they were actually looking at. And 298 people did the survey, and 85% of people could recognize the images for what the influence was. And out of those 25 images, there were 3 images where 100% of people could recognize the image. So we're not talking just some random expressionist kind of a thing. We really are, the imagery is very, very real. But these symbols, the symbols are found around the world. So I have a little team of people working with me in different parts of the world, in India and Slovenia, in America and Australia and New Zealand. And everybody has seen at least some of these symbols. And they're using different water, they think they have different languages, and yet this appears to be like a global, sort of like a language, but it's very relative to hieroglyphs, and that it is a conceptual, symbolic language that was not designed to be spoken, but designed to be felt. It's sharing not just a word, but a concept. So the way in which we read them is not simple like ABC. It's actually an invitation to dive deep into, what does this mean to me? So much about the world we've labeled. We're fabulous at labeling everything, including people. And so, for example, I might have a cup, and we call it a cup, and a phone, we call a phone, and I can see you on the screen at the moment, and there's you, and I can see a pen, all these things we've labeled so we can communicate that this is what we're talking about. But if we were to then go, what does this pen mean to me? What does that cup and phone, and what do you mean to me? Rather than say, oh, this is you, this is the cup. You know, you have an entirely new and way of seeing the world, where we're looking at everything as information, and then we're going, okay, well, what does it mean to me to be seeing this information? If that tree, which I'm looking at right now, if that tree is information, what is that information giving me? Rather than, oh, it's a tree. So there's a lot more depth in that. But, you know, literally, I know me, I could actually probably talk about the importance of that particular tree for about 3 years. So, I mean, I wouldn't be doing much with my life if I did that all day long. But it is an interesting way to view the world. So I'll share some hydroglyphs for you to have a look at. So here are 64 examples of the word imagination, which is the empty star. Now, what I have done with all of my hydroglyphs is likened them to something in nature, because I think that anything that is in nature, it's kind of a biomimicry kind of a thing, anything that is in nature that shares and holds the same pattern or similar pattern has probably got something to tell us about its meaning, or its layers of meaning. So when I write there other potential meanings, the reason I say that is that I have already used all those words. I've seen an empty star appear, but I haven't yet done it 50 times. So I know that this means imagination, and I've also discovered over the course of doing this that when you see more than one, it means you're thinking about more than one thing. You're thinking about two things, or two people are thinking of the same thing. And it's very complex. So this frilled angle is one of which my team have all seen. It means message, and it is like this triangle, like this angle with these frills around it. And we are beginning to wonder, though, if the information is all here on the top, and yet we just don't know how to read that yet, because this looks very much like the information glyph, all of this up here on top of this ice. So you zoom in, you can see how many there are here. Now, it is interesting because there seem to be some significance to the endings. Sometimes there's like these hearts on the end, and you can see another one over here, and sometimes it kind of ends where there's more of an opening, and so I think that they have some significance as well. So there's again, this work is like the movie Arrival. I don't know if you ever saw that, but my friend of mine Alec recommended that I watch this movie Arrival. It's basically about these aliens that come to Earth in these pods. It's kind of like looked like a giant Shiva lingam kind of a pod thing, and and anyway, they are like giant squids, and they shoot this ink out which designs like a language, and so these scientists go in to try to identify what they're saying, and this is kind of like that. It's like I have no idea how this is working, or I'm really just very much in the extremely early stages of learning how to read this and understand this. Now, the coin glyph looks literally like a coin stuck in the ice. There is at times, I'm not sure if you can see them clearly in here, but there are times where you can actually see like the line, you can't see in this one, but there's lines along the edging, just like in a real coin. It literally looks three-dimensional, And so it does mean money, and it also means abundance. Now, a lady on social media reached out and said, well, with all of the wisdom that water has to share, and being so ancient and endless and with no kind of seeming beginning or end, why the hell does water want to talk about money? And I said, well, if this is a language, we can't pick and choose what words we would like to leave out, given that money has been a very big part of the way in which human society has kind of set wealth or attachment to money, and whatever we kind of like put value to, it gives it some worth, and it's usually financial. And so it's interesting because this is not just about looking at money and going, okay, well, does that mean I'm getting some money, or is this kind of like we're like what it is, where we might start thinking, is this just some kind of like fortune telling? You know, people have said, oh, so this is what that's like, and I'm like, no. When you see a coin, you're going to also have to go, why are we seeing a coin? Why aren't we seeing like a note, a money note? Why aren't we seeing something else? Because money, there could be a totally different symbol for it. Just so happens that it looks like a coin. If you go back in our history, we've been throwing coins into wishing wells for so long. Coins have been like, there is some fountain in Italy that's making $3 million a year from the coins that still get thrown into that fountain. That's some serious money. And so, but when you kind of go back into when people thought, well, if there is some deity or some energy in the water that can grant my wish, there needs to be some exchange. And often it would be silver. And, you know, that was kind of acted like a kind of colloidal silver for the water. So then when you go back into ancient Greek and Roman times, when someone would pass away, they would have coins put on their eyes so that they could pay the ferryman to take them across the river to actually get to Hades. And when they got to Hades, there were more rivers actually, but the two main ones were the river of forgetfulness and the river of remembering. If anyone actually drank from the river of remembering, they would actually be able to come back with all the memory of everyone that's ever been, to be able to, as like a prophet, they would come back. But most people would drink from the river of forgetfulness. So it's, you know, when you go back into all these historical things and you see what the significance of a symbol is, and even if you just look at it as a circle, that is one of our first most incredibly powerful symbols, and the symbol of wholeness. So when you think, what is money? What is money to me? Do I know my wealth? Do I know my value? It's such a way in which we can look at it and go, oh, yeah, money. But actually, money is representative of what we put value to. Now, do we put value to ourselves? This is what I mean by a much deeper meaning. In abundance, you can be abundant in so many things. So what is this? Water is showing us something important. The fern hexagon is also a very important one because it has so many layers of meaning that I've identified. I've spent, probably this is the one I've spent the longest on. We as humans give water labels too. We will call it living and dead. But water actually, it doesn't die. Just because it might be polluted or doesn't have very good structure, it doesn't mean it's actually dead. Water will eventually evaporate. And so water is always in one of its stages. And so the living glyph was a very easy one for me to do because, you know, there's such a term, even biblically, about living water. So I thought, well, I was really curious to see how it would respond. Now the fern hexagon that you see here, I call it that because it looks like a star with a hexagon shape with ferns coming off each leg.
Mm-hmm.
Now that is what I would see in beautiful, pristine spring water. And the bigger the better. So the larger the hexagon is, and I've seen hexagons take up an entire petri dish. I have a very sacred place that I love and am very connected to in New Zealand at the top of the South Island. And there is a water source. You have to climb up this great big hill, kind of mountain. And at the top of that there is this cave. Sounds like something from Indiana Jones. And at the top of the cave there is stalagmites and stalactites and this spring that has literally come up so high and it's bubbling up. And that has the water that I've seen where it's taken up the entire dish. And it is amazing. And I've discovered that the fern hexagon shape becomes smaller and smaller and starts to degrade the further away from the mouth of the source it was taken. And so there's a lot of study I've done around this particular shape. But with hydroglyphs, I knew it meant living in gratitude and healthy. But before I discovered that the word death. And so a man had reached out to me and he said, look, I've been told I only have a few months to live. Please ask water what death looks like. So I wrote the word death and I kept seeing the living glyph. And I'm like, what's going on here? And I did it well more than 50 times because I didn't want to get it wrong. And then I realized, oh, of course, water views death as a transition of life, like liquid to gas. There is no death in the realm of water, just in our perception of life. And so the death, really, what it means is transition. And so it was a very powerful discovery and very beautiful, I think. The winter tree means change. And it also means winter, so I can actually change that to saying winter because I've done enough studies now to say, yes, it means winter. And I call it the winter tree because it doesn't have any leaves. But the lotus means enlightenment and purity. You can see how beautiful that is, and all these gorgeous lotuses that have formed. This one is even inside of a triangle.
Amazing.
And these are just some I like. I'm still working on putting all 64 examples together so I haven't done them for all of them yet. It's a very time-consuming process for me because I didn't do them one after the other. And in the beginning stages, I didn't know that hydroglyphs were going to be such a remarkable discovery. So I have to go through all my photos and remember which one was which and put them all together. So it's a very time-consuming process. But free energy is one of my favorites because it's so beautiful and it looks like a pyramid with like a Tesla coil and geometry is just emanating out of it.
Totally.
And then just to give you some example of the complexity, this is the creation glyph. I absolutely love this glyph because it is the whole dish. There's these seeds and this kind of fire that emanates out of it. Now the creation glyph, this particular one, also means fire. Now at the different stages of melting and freezing, within the creation glyph, you will see these other patterns. This one means water, this one means air, and this one means earth. And they are all aspects of the creation glyph, which is just really incredible to me. And this goes into some more. I mean, I'll share them if you want. I always have to say to people, I did this work prior to COVID. So this isn't me projecting. This was the image I got for the word pharmaceutical, and I can now say it also means chemical. Unfortunately, I am seeing this design in some water sources that I never used to see this design in. And so are other people. This
Makes
was
sense with our rampant pollution
yeah,
in the pharmaceutical industry in our water. That makes absolute sense. That
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Now this was a interesting one. I can safely say that this also means sugar. Now these are usually small and often you'll see more than one. was quite interesting because the other day on one of my workshops, a man got two of these, and I said, well, it does mean addiction, but it also means sugar. And sometimes when you see two of them, it's saying, hey, buddy, you're addicted to sugar. And when his face just dropped like, oh my God, how could they know I have this sugar addiction? As so many of us do, but his was clearly obvious. It was quite fun to kind of see that just kind of in real time. So here are just the example of what the stairway I was talking about looked like. Hearts look love looks like a heart, and this tree of life is beautiful. It means wholeness. You can see that there are these ovals on each side of the tree of life, and the ovals are actually a hydroglyph, which means lungs or breathing. So to read this, essentially, it would mean breathing into wholeness.
Wow,
Um,
absolutely amazing. It reminds me of like the energy field of the body, the
the
toroidal.
toroidal field. That's what I've actually likened it to in my hydroglyph PDF. So um, it's really, really amazing just how much information is there. And it's also a little overwhelming. So I'm very grateful that whenever I do workshops and whenever I have a private Facebook group for people who are actively using my technique to share in. There's over 300 of us in there. So it's kind of like a giant study to say, I'm not the only one that can do this. And it is actually interesting because somebody commended me yesterday, and sometimes I'm always surprised to hear it, saying, oh, I'm so happy that you so openly share this wisdom.
Mhm.
And years ago, when I really kind of learnt about this, and I started thinking about sharing it, some well-meaning people, they just said, look, no, you need to like monetize it really heavily, make it really expensive, like really exclusive, like this big mystery, and you need to market it this way and this way, and oh, I can't do that. I mean, you have to go back to why. Like, why are you doing this work in the first place? Is this
Mhm.
about money? If it's about money, then it's like, well, that's just not me.
Mhm.
This has come about so organically. And because I am literally like a medium, water has got this incredibly amazing voice that we can see. And how can I like not share when water is literally like can speak for itself? And so and so I'm like, I feel so honored to be able to share this with the world because at the very least, still people are getting their head around the idea that water can store information. Lots of people, they just think all water is kind of pretty much the same. Yeah, it's fine to drink tap water. Oh, yeah, whatever, whatever. This is like just whatever. This is all whatever. In fact, I was actually at my daughter's netball yesterday, netball thing, and a mum came up and was asking me what I did, and I said I study water, and she says, oh, you know, well, what is there to know about water really? And I'm like, oh God, how long have you got? and and but to be able to actually do this at home, I mean, people just need their phone. They need to order a petri dish. I use glass. I don't use plastic. Glass is essentially made of silica. Silica is a type of crystal. Crystals store information, and this kind of glass helps water to store information for longer. So plastic is a pain because the plastic, actually the water tends to repel against it. So you have these big holes opening up in the petri dishes, and it's just kind of makes water behave in a really weird way. And so I like glass. And every time I do workshops and they keep filling up more and more and more and more each time, and I am having to add more spaces, it's because there's people that just are amazed And they're like, this is something we can do, really? I'm like, yeah, let's show you how. And then there's children learning how to do this. And since I shared this information on another podcast, and because I think you are just incredible, and normally I would not share this on podcasts, and I tend to share this information really only on my advanced workshops or my workshops. But I really do want to share it with you because I think it will help your people and whoever's listening to this, then they need to know. So I have learned something that I think is potentially one of the greatest discoveries we've had outside of hydroglyphs. Obviously, they're incredible. And just a little note about them. When I shared my work, my hydroglyphs with Jerry Pollack, I had our little group that have been helping me with them on this call. And he said, look, if you can put it together into a scientific kind of manner and have all those examples there and all of that, and you can show the world, of course people are going to say, oh, that's so fringe, oh, that's this and this. They're always going to have people doing that. But he said, this could be one of the greatest discoveries of the century. This is amazing. And so, and then bringing it around to this healing discovery. So my children, and I think, children are being born to help us learn about how to live this life and how to, better ourselves if we learn to listen to them and not tell them what to think. And
Absolutely.
and so, actually I interviewed my two children the other day for something, and I said, so what do you think, water is trying to say? And my son Rama the Charmer, he said, well, I think with your hydroglyphs we'll eventually kind of learn what the messages are. And my daughter, who's like an 82-year-old, she's really only 12, and she said, well, I think the water's just trying to teach us how to be better people. I'm like, yeah, probably. and so she was the first one that showed me this thing. So I had done some beautiful crystallography using some lovely spring water, and this is going back years ago. And this is when it first happened, and my daughter came over and she looked at the crystallography in the petri dish and she said, can I have that, mummy? And I said, sure. So I was like, so gave it to her, and then she started to eat it. And I'm like, oh, what are you doing? And she says, oh, it's good for me. And I was like, oh, okay. And then about a week later, my son Rama, he came over, he said, oh, can I have that, Mum, can I eat it? And I'm like, oh, did you talk to Shanti? And he said, about what? And I'm like, about the ice. And he goes, no. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. And so I'm like, oh, because I observe patterns. That is what I do. And I'm like, oh, this is very interesting. And over the course of the years, they'd come and they'd eat it when it looked like something they wanted to eat. It had to be a picture they liked. And I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. And then my gorgeous partner, who I actually met at the 2019 water conference, and he started using my technique to do his own study on plant medicines, and he would write the words of the plant medicines. He was writing ayahuasca and their psychoactive ingredients, and so he would write like DMT. He was writing like ibogaine, cybacillin, like all of the different things. And so what he did that was different than anything I've done, he actually made some amazing discoveries. So firstly, what he did is he did do 4 tests in a row using the same word. And the results that he got were fascinating. He would get like the organism glyph, then he would get the I glyph, which means visionary. Organism means organism. Then he would get the third one and a fourth one of which I haven't identified. And then when he did DMT, he got the organism, the visionary glyph, and the same other 2. Then when he did another plant medicine, same again. So he got entire sequences. And just if we put those first 2 together, it means visionary organism. So then when he used LSD as a word, it didn't show the same patterning because it was not a plant medicine. So it was relative to the plant medicines. But then then he started to eat
Mhm.
the ice. So after eating ayahuasca for a week, said to me, you know, I think I need to take this a little seriously, because he started to having some experiences, not like crazy, but subtle.
Mhm.
And so I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so interesting. And then I knew it wasn't just my children that were eating the ice, because I talked to lots and lots of parents and people doing this work, and a lady that had been doing this said, oh, my children do that too. And so I'm like, oh, so this is something the children of the world are needing to teach us, reminding us about. We need to step into liquid crystal. And so it's like this ice age, you know, that we keep talking about coming into the ice age. Well, right now, the stage where the ice is beginning to melt is so powerful, because that's liquid crystal. This is the stage, the space of creation that we are in right now. And it is so incredibly powerful. And this is what I think we need to sort of, we don't need to do anything, do whatever you want, but it is such an invitation to really look at what is liquid crystal, what is the stage we are in right now, and what is this power that we can learn from the children eating this crystallography. And it's very interesting, because the difference between blessing your water and drinking it, and using a blessing as your influence word, and then eating the ice that has taken that information but then made it in form that you can actually eat. So that you're eating the liquid crystal, the design of your actual word. So I had a lady, and this is very early stages, but a lady that had had really terrible insomnia. And so I've had a couple of people actually, just one lady's got back to me so far. So she wrote the word rest, and for three times a day she would eat the ice that meant rest. And I think she got in touch with me about 10 days later, and she said she'd had the best sleep she had a few days, you know, afterwards. And so really amazing potential. What it
Mhm.
means, like it's so early days, but I mean, when you kind of like get this idea, water is updating its information every trillionth of a second in its liquid form. But as it begins to slow down, and before it's frozen completely, what you have is this layer of literal information that is holding a power. And I think that because we are bodies of water, as you know very well, by molecular count we're 99% water. But that actually means that there are more water molecules in our bodies than stars in the Milky Way. And I went to the Auckland Observatory a couple of months ago, and they were showing just how many stars really are, what that looks like in the Milky Way. It's mind-boggling. And so when you are like really just imagine we are bodies of water with all the potential of every aspect of stage that water has. You know, the secrets are in the subtleties. They
Mhm.
really, really are. And that includes the kind of water inside of us. So I've studied that the stage I found that works with this technique is where there's two stages of water, you know, a liquid and a liquid crystal.
Mhm.
But I think, as I mentioned before, there are two types of water in people, the physical and the spiritual. And that comes even down to in the Maori language. My dad's Maori from New Zealand. The word for spirit is wairua, which wai means water and rua means two. So these two waters. And so this idea of two waters has been traveling with me since really the very early days of my work. And when I have studied egg albumin, I discovered something really interesting, because I was trying to think, like, what water would be the most informed, and I thought it's got to be amniotic fluid. And since that's not easily accessible, I thought, well, what about eggs? And so what I discovered in egg white, which I teach in my advanced workshop, which I've just done, which was like 4 hours long. People can get the recording on my website. It's like, I share so much, but I also share how to do this egg white test. And so there's two kind of parts to the egg white. This gloopy gelatinous part, which is kind of the protein for the bird, and then this thinner part, which is more like saliva. So when you freeze the thin part, in healthy free-range eggs, you will identify 6 complex patterns, and 3 of them are more complex than the other 3. And in caged hen eggs, you will see at maximum there will be 2 patterns that form. And what I did, though, again, I'm just saying there's that 2 types of water thing. There's even 2 types of water in egg albumin. But what I did was I took a healthy, happy, free-range egg. Well, let's call it the good egg. It's just easier to say. And then we take the caged hen egg, the bad egg. It's not bad or good. It's just easy to explain. And I put them side by side and left them overnight. And what I observed the next morning was that for the first time ever, the bad egg, its crystallography had started to look more like the good egg. And I shared that on social media. And so everybody, of course, when you become an adult, we become so cynical. And we're, oh yeah, but what if you surround the good egg with bad eggs? So I did that. I surrounded this little good egg with like circles of bad eggs. And I did a test, like I had a control for the good egg and a control for the bad egg. So the control for the good egg looked just like the good eggs, the control for the bad egg looked just like the bad eggs, but I used them out of their egg containers. And so what I observed is that the good egg that was in the middle, when I cracked it and did the crystallography, it looked perfect, beautiful, it hadn't been affected whatsoever. But every single bad egg, relative to the proximity of which it was, how close it was to the good egg, all of them had improved. The closer ones had improved the most, the further away ones had improved, but not as much as the ones close to the good egg. So for all the cliches there are, what I see the most biggest meaning of from that is like really heal yourself, you heal others. And so, but this idea of water as the observer is a really interesting one, because people say to me, is the water conscious, or is your consciousness impacting the water? It's a great question. Of course, we need to investigate. And so I thought, well, when am I not conscious? Like, how can I do a test where I'm not conscious? You know, can't ask someone to just like knock me out and then do a test. So I thought, well, like when I'm dreaming, that's a good one. So I put my petri dish of water. I did a study for 3 months. I put the petri dish of water by my bed with the intention that it captures some part of my dream. And I only used the dreams that I forgot the next day. Now, when I would freeze it in the morning, when I saw the imagery, it was so striking that it would jog my memory and remind me of what I dreamt about. It was really incredible, actually. So, and I was also dreaming, when I sleep I'm in complete darkness, so this work was done in darkness. Now, what does it mean? Well, there's a lot of things it could mean, but for me, when I think of the fact that we can observe ourselves outside of all the internal workings of the experiences that we have within this physical body, and I know we can observe ourselves. I asked my son, do you know what that means to like observe yourself? Have you had that experience? And he said, I have it all the time at school. I'm like, how come? Rama's like cheeky little boy. He goes, oh, because I'm half asleep at school and I kind of zone out. And then he says he kind of has this way of like seeing the whole room and like imagining, kind of like just having this sense of observing himself and everyone in the room. And so we can't all do that. So is it that the observer of ourselves is actually what's sharing the information to the dish, or is there some other element within the water that's able to be the observer of us? Is water watching us? And I can say that in my rather saucy area of my last advanced workshop, I actually share a funny story where this friend of mine, she had this incredibly beautiful crystal that she had by her bed, and I said, could you maybe leave some water by your bed for me, you know, and so see if we can get that crystal energy, and when I come to see you, I'll grab the water from you and I'll test it. So she did, but that evening, her and her partner had had some intimate time together. And let's just say the image in the ice was not a crystal. It was rather unexpected, and I rang her and I said, so what were you doing last night? And so there's this fun aspect to this, but it's like, well, if water is in the air, I mean, how do prayers work? Like, how do we have that sense that somebody's like watching us? Like Rupert Sheldrake, did that study. It's like, if you stare at someone, will they turn around? Do they have the sense that we're being stared at? You know, we often have that feeling. Well, if you think that we have this, the water that's attracted to our electrical charge is creating this field of energy, when we stare at somebody, well, we're also staring and sharing our energy with their energy. So there is an information exchange that happens that we sense, but we can't explain exactly how. Really interesting stuff. But when I interviewed people who had had near-death experiences, and this is where I think the idea of the water being the observer is very relevant too. Three of them, well, all of them had this sense of rising. And three of them told me that then when they looked down at their body being resuscitated, they actually said, oh, I hope that person's going to be okay. That's what they thought. There was no sense of I anymore. There was only the observer, which was really, really interesting. And then they came back into their bodies when they were resuscitated. And I think because that electrical charge part of what it is when we are in this living aspect of this body, even there is aspects of the brain that are still firing, that still have some activity even after the heart stops beating. And so I think that that aspect, and the fact that, well, I don't know 100% if it's a fact, but it has been written by a guy who wrote the something molecule, what is it? Anyway, about DMT. Do you
Yes.
know
Yeah.
what that
Yeah.
book is
The God
called?
molecule.
The God
Yeah.
Molecule. And he says that at the end of our life, our body basically our brain drops all its DMT stores. So there's this huge flood of DMT. And so that probably helps the brain to keep firing off more information and have that electrical charge, which gives the soul or the spirit, which either water and consciousness are so intimately intertwined that they behave as one, or perhaps water is consciousness. I don't know. But the fact that I think that you can't separate those two. And so I think that when the essence or the spiritual water within us leaves the body, it leaves kind of like the way in which you have boiling water and then it evaporates. You can see it as a vapor. But because there's so many stages of water that we probably haven't even identified, we've identified 4, and within the ice realm there are so many different types of ice. And so we have all these, subtleties. Certainly, I think within the vapor realm, there are much more to learn. So either maybe the spirit or the soul or the subtle body is essentially a water that transitions into a vibrational vapor that we just can't see, but some animals can, and maybe some people can say they can, or it's already a type of gas that is released and can move and track along our electrical charge, which enables us to observe ourselves and observe ourselves when we have a near-death experience, and also enables us to come back because there's still that electrical charge, that track, that silver thread. And when that is broken, that is when finally the soul leaves completely and the body remains. So from my observations of all of this years of work and being very interested in different belief systems my whole life, water has answered so many of my bigger questions than in ways that I could have never, ever even imagined. So the potential for information here to learn more and more about what it is to be alive, to be a being of light and water and consciousness, um, and being a liquid crystal because we're not fresh water, we're salt water. Um, it's very, very plausible to me that if you put water as the observer for that slit experiment they do for quantum physics,
Mhm.
to see if actually water could be and act as if it's a person observing would be very interesting.
Ugh, that would be fascinating. What you're saying right now is just mind blowing. And it really gets to the heart of life's biggest questions.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of one of the things I've always been interested in. When I was a little girl, I always wanted to be an archaeologist. And now I kind of get to be a soul, I call it soul archaeology, where really we're kind of looking into the aspects of spirit and who we are and what we are, and realizing that just as water is ageless, so are we. We just have labels that we like to put on ourselves in this meat suit, but in fact, actually, we're so much more than we have given ourselves the credit for. One of the things, and maybe it was one of the last things I'll share, is that in my last advanced workshop, I had on as a special guest my friend Venice, and she was the director of a show called Magical Egypt. And in that, we discussed what the ancient Egyptians knew about water and how they used it as a medicine and various different things. But of course, the question came up about like who built the pyramids and how was that a thing. And of course, we always get the people saying, "Oh, it's this, it's this," and there's always the alien option. And she said, of course, not saying that aliens are not real. She said, but no. She said, stop with the alien talk. She said, what everybody has forgotten is that we were that powerful. Humans have forgotten how incredibly powerful we are because we think somehow that to be powerful it means to overpower. But actually, real power is to set light inside of yourself and expand it out so that we can all connect this power source of light. And that is what we are because water uses light to connect and design. And so if we start to really then look into the way in which cymatics works and the way in which water responds to sound and frequency and energy, and you look at what Tesla says, and then you go, we in this world that we live in right now, we are so easy to go, well, aliens must have done that because it has no way we could have. But back then, the ancient Egyptians had been around for so much longer in their civilization than we have, that of course the way in which they understood consciousness and the way in which they really understood the world was so advanced. And they were a people. And so it's like, why do we lessen our power? Why do we lessen who we are? Imagine we could have done that. Imagine we've just forgotten and we need to re-remember. And part of this work I do with water is helping people to re-remember who they are.
That's absolutely beautiful. I think that's such a profound thing that you're saying and such a beautiful way to sort of conclude all this information that you've been sharing. And I couldn't agree more with what you're saying about water and consciousness, and how do they interact, and how does that answer our bigger questions? And it really comes down to this power we have as individuals. So I am so grateful for your words and your work and your presence in the world.